The year was 2247, and humanity had finally reached the stars in ways their ancestors could only dream about. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the viewport of her ship and watched the massive station grow larger as they approached. Her heart beating fast with excitement and fear in equal measure. The station was called Kethvara, and it was older than human civilization itself. A crystal structure that stretched across thousands of kilometers of empty space. Home to the Galactic Council that had ruled the Orion Arm for 6 million years. Elena had spent her entire career preparing for this moment, learning alien languages and customs, studying the histories of species that had been traveling between stars while humans were still living in caves. She smoothed her formal uniform and turned to face her team of diplomats and translators who waited behind her with nervous expressions on their faces. "Remember everything we discussed," she said to them, her voice calm despite the tension she felt inside. "We are here to show them that humanity is ready to join the galactic community as equals and partners." Her second-in-command, a young man named David Park, nodded, but she could see the doubt in his eyes. They had all heard the stories about the Council, how they viewed younger species as little more than animals, how they had destroyed entire civilizations for minor offenses against their ancient laws. The docking procedure took nearly an hour, and then they were walking through corridors made of living crystal that hummed with energy older than Earth itself. Council guards escorted them. Massive creatures that looked like insects standing upright on 4 legs. Their compound eyes watching the humans with what Elena could only describe as contempt. These were the Varathkai, the dominant species of the Council, and they considered themselves the rightful rulers of the galaxy. The Council chamber was a vast dome filled with representatives from over 300 species, beings of every shape and size imaginable. Some floating in anti-gravity fields, others swimming in tanks of liquid, still others existing as nothing more than patterns of light. High Arbiter Zeth Korin sat at the center of it all on a throne of black crystal, his insectoid body covered in ceremonial armor that gleamed like polished obsidian. Elena walked forward with her head held high, following the protocol she had memorized over years of study. And she began to speak the formal words of greeting that would introduce humanity to the galactic stage. Everything was going according to plan until it was not. When Elena finished her speech, Zethkaran rose from his throne and descended to stand before her, his height nearly 3 meters tall. His forearms folded across his armored chest. He spoke in his own language, a series of clicks and hisses that her translator device converted into words she could understand. "So these are the humans," he said, and his voice dripped with disdain. "The violent primitives who have spread across 17 systems like a disease." Elena felt anger rise in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral and professional. "We come in peace, High Arbiter," she replied through her own translator. "We seek only friendship and mutual cooperation with the great peoples of the Council." Zeth Koran made a sound that her translator identified as laughter, though it sounded more like bones breaking. "Friendship," he repeated. "What could primitives who have existed for barely a cosmic moment offer to civilizations that have endured for millions of years?" Elena took a breath and prepared to respond with more diplomatic words. But then Zeth Koran leaned closer to her, his compound eyes inches from her face. Without thinking, Elena looked directly into those eyes, meeting his gaze the way she would meet the gaze of any person she was speaking to. The chamber went absolutely silent. Every alien in the room froze and stared at her with expressions she could not read, but knew instinctively were not good. Zeth Koran stepped back, and his forearms spread wide in what her translator identified as a gesture of extreme offense. "She challenges me," he announced to the chamber, his voice rising to a shriek. "This primitive creature dares to issue a death challenge to the High Arbiter of the Galactic Council." Elena felt her blood turn cold as she realized her mistake. "I meant no offense," she said quickly, raising her hands in a gesture of peace. In human culture, looking someone in the eyes is a sign of respect and honesty. "I was not aware that your people view it differently." But Zefcoin was not listening. "The penalty for an unprovoked death challenge against the High Arbiter is death," he declared. "The primitive will submit to ritual execution, or her entire species will face the consequences." The chamber erupted in noise as hundreds of alien voices spoke at once, some calling for Elena's death, others debating the proper response. A few questioning whether this was truly a violation of council law. Elena stood her ground, even as her team behind her began to panic. "Will not submit to execution for a cultural misunderstanding," she said, her voice strong and clear despite the fear she felt. "Humanity came here seeking peace, and we do not surrender our people to death for innocent mistakes." Zefkaren's mandibles clicked together in what she now recognized as rage. "Then your species has made its choice," he said, and he turned to address the full council. "I call for a vote on the extermination of humanity, every last one of them, wiped from the galaxy, as a lesson to all primitives who would dare to challenge their betters." The vote took less than an hour. Species after species cast their decision, and Elena watched in growing horror as the numbers mounted against. Humanity 287 voted for extermination only. 25 voted against. The sentence was passed, and Zefkoran turned back to Elena with triumph in his alien eyes. "You have 30 cycles to surrender unconditionally," he told her. "Every human being will submit to the council for processing and termination. Your worlds will be cleansed, your technology destroyed, your very existence erased from the records of history." He paused, and his mandibles spread in what might have been a smile. "Our combined fleet numbers over 2 million warships," he continued. "We've been told that humanity possesses perhaps 800. Resistance is not merely futile. It is laughable." Elena said nothing as she and her team were escorted back to their ship. The journey home took 3 days, and she spent every moment of it composing her report to Earth Command. When she finished, she sat alone in her quarters and allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. She had failed, and now every human being in existence would pay the price for her failure. The transmission reached Earth 12 hours later. Admiral James Chun waited in his office, the words glowing on his screen in the dim light of evening. He read it once, and then he read it again, making sure he understood exactly what the council had declared. Then he set the tablet down on his desk and sat in silence for a long moment. His aide, a young lieutenant named Sarah Wong, waited nervously by the door. Finally, Admiral Chun looked up at her, and his expression was not one of fear or despair. It was something else entirely, something that made Lieutenant Wong take an involuntary step backward. "Get me everyone," the Admiral said quietly, his voice as cold and hard as steel. "Every admiral, every general, every scientist, every engineer, every single person who matters. I want them all in the war room within the hour." Lieutenant Wong saluted and hurried to carry out his orders. "Admiral." Chun turned to look out his window at the night sky filled with stars. Somewhere out there, 2 million warships were preparing to come and kill every human being who had ever lived. The Admiral smiled. And it was not a pleasant smile. "They have no idea what they have just started," he said to no one but himself. No idea at all. The first week of the countdown passed, and the Galactic Council waited for humanity to respond. They expected panic and chaos and desperate pleas for mercy. They expected human leaders to turn against each other as their primitive society collapsed under the weight of certain doom. They expected transmissions begging for negotiations, offering anything and everything in exchange for survival. What they received was nothing. Absolute complete silence. Every human transmission across all 17 star systems simply stopped, as if someone had flipped a switch and turned off an entire civilization. High Arbiter Seth Curran sat on his throne and listened to the reports from his intelligence officers with growing irritation. "What do you mean there is nothing?" he demanded, his forearms gesturing in frustration. 200 billion humans cannot simply vanish. The intelligence officer of Arthkai named Kethril bowed low before responding. "The humans have gone dark, High Arbiter," he explained. "Our scout ships report that their colonies appear abandoned. Cities empty, orbital stations powered down. It is as if they have simply ceased to exist." Zethkoran made a dismissive sound with his mandibles. "They flee," he declared to the assembled council members who had gathered to hear the reports. "Like vermin, they scatter into the void, hoping to hide from our justice. It matters not. We will find them, and we will exterminate them wherever they run." Most of the council members clicked and hummed their agreement, satisfied with this explanation. But one observer did not share their confidence. Selrath of the Kithran observers watched the proceedings from her designated position in the chamber, her large eyes taking in every detail, her mind processing information at speeds that would have seemed impossible to most other species. The Kithrans were not warriors or conquerors. They were watchers and recorders. Their gift was the ability to see patterns in data that others could not perceive, and the patterns Selrath was seeing made no sense at all. She returned to her quarters and began to analyze every piece of information her people had gathered about human space over the past 2 weeks. The humans were not fleeing. She realized with growing unease. They were moving. Every ship in their fleet was in motion, not away from council space, but between their own systems, following routes that seemed random at first glance but revealed a terrifying order when viewed as a whole. Every resource they possessed was being relocated according to some vast plan that Selrath could not quite understand, and the energy readings were impossible. Humanity was burning through more fuel in these 30 days than most species used in a century. Massive power signatures blooming across their territory like flowers of pure energy. They were building something. Selrath requested an audience with the council and was granted permission to speak during the 3rd week of the countdown. She stood before the assembled representatives of 300 species and presented her findings, showing them the data she had collected, explaining the patterns she had identified. "The humans are not running," she told them, her voice calm but urgent. "They are preparing. Every man and woman and child in their civilization is working together towards some common goal. They are constructing something on a scale we cannot comprehend." High Arbiter Zethkoran interrupted her with a harsh clicking sound. "What could primitives construct in 30 days that would threaten civilizations that have existed for millions of years?" he demanded. "We have technologies they cannot dream of, weapons they cannot imagine, fleets that could darken the skies of 1,000 worlds." Selrath met his gaze, forgetting for a moment that such a gesture was considered offensive in Varthkai culture. "I do not know what they are building," she admitted, "but I know that we should be afraid of it, High Arbiter. I formally request permission to evacuate my homeworld until this conflict is resolved." The chamber erupted in laughter, hundreds of alien voices expressing amusement at the Kithran's fear. Zethkern's mandibles spread wide in what passed for a smile among his kind. "Request denied," he said. "We will not spread panic among the lesser races, because one observer has frightened herself with shadows and patterns. The humans are primitives and they will die like primitives. This is the way of the galaxy." Selrath bowed and returned to her position. But she did not stop watching. The 4th week passed and the silence continued. Scouts reported that human space was now completely dark. No lights on any world. No ships moving between systems. Nothing but empty void where a civilization of 200 billion had existed just days before. Some council members began to whisper that perhaps the humans had simply given up and killed themselves. Rather than face the council's justice, others suggested that they had fled beyond the edges of known space, running so far that they could never be found. Only Selroth knew the truth, and no one would listen to her on the final day of the countdown. She sat alone in her quarters and watched the clock tick down to 0 when midnight came according to Galactic Standard Time. Something happened that made Selroth's blood run cold. Every star in human-controlled space blinked, not the planets, not the stations, the stars themselves. 17 suns flickered in perfect synchronization, as if someone had momentarily placed a hand over each of them. It was impossible, and yet it had happened, and Selroth understood in that moment that everything they thought they knew about humanity was wrong. Then the transmission came. It arrived on every frequency simultaneously, broadcast with enough power to reach every corner of council space. A single word spoken in a human voice that carried no fear and no desperation. No. That was all. No surrender, no negotiation, no plea for mercy. Just that single word of defiance hurled into the face of 2 million warships and 6 million years of galactic supremacy. Selroth began to pack her belongings, preparing to flee even without official permission. High Arbiter Zethkorin called for the Annihilation fleet to launch immediately, eager to crush the human defiance and prove the power of the Council once and for all. 800,000 warships departed Council space, the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. Enough firepower to crack planets and extinguish stars. They entered Fold space and disappeared, racing toward human territory to deliver final justice. Selroth watched them go and felt something she had never experienced before. She felt pity for them, not for the humans who were about to be destroyed, but for the Council forces who thought they were about to win an easy victory. She had seen the patterns and she knew the truth. The humans had not been running or hiding or preparing to surrender. They had been getting ready, and whatever they had built during that month of silence was about to be unleashed upon a galaxy that had no idea what was coming. Selroth finished packing and booked passage on the first transport leaving Kethvara. She did not know where she would go, only that she needed to be far away from Council space when the humans finally showed the galaxy what humanity was truly capable of. The transport departed just as the first reports began to arrive from the Annihilation fleet. Reports that made no sense. Reports of ships vanishing without a trace. Reports of weapons that should not exist. Reports of something called the Thanatos Array. And then the reports stopped coming entirely. Selroth closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening. The war had begun, and she suspected it would be over very soon, but not in the way the Council had expected, not in the way anyone had expected. Fleet Admiral Kethvarin commanded the Annihilation fleet from the bridge of his flagship, a vessel so massive that it could have housed a small city. Within its armored hull, he stood before the main view screen and watched as his 800,000 warships emerged from Fold space at the edge of the Sol system, the birthplace of humanity, the heart of their primitive civilization. All ships report ready for combat, his tactical officer announced. Human defense forces are minimal. Perhaps 50 vessels detected in orbit around their homeworld. Kethvarin made a sound of contempt. 50 ships against 800,000, he said. They cannot even muster a proper defense. This will be a slaughter. All vessels advance. Destroy everything. The fleet began to move forward in perfect formation. A wall of death stretching across millions of kilometers of space. And then the universe went wrong. The first ship to die was a cruiser near the center of the formation. A vessel crewed by 3,000 Varathkai warriors. One moment it existed, and the next moment it simply was not there. No explosion. No debris. No warning. The ship just vanished as if it had never been. Kethvorin stared at his tactical display in confusion. What happened? He demanded. Where did that ship go? Before anyone could answer. More ships began to disappear. They vanished by the dozens, then by the hundreds, blinking out of existence like stars being swallowed by darkness. The tactical officer's voice rose in panic. Some kind of weapon. Admiral, it is opening rifts in fold space directly inside our vessels. The ships are being pulled into compressed dimensions and crushed. Kethvorin felt something he had never experienced in 300 years of warfare. He felt fear. Return fire, he screamed. Find the source and destroy it. But there was nothing to fire at. The human ships remained in orbit around Earth. Not moving, not attacking. Just watching as the Council fleet tore itself apart. The weapon was everywhere and nowhere. Invisible death reaching out across the void to claim ship after ship after ship. In the first hour, 50,000 Council vessels ceased to exist. In the second hour, another 100,000 joined them. By the sixth hour, the mighty Annihilation fleet had been reduced to less than half its original strength. And not a single human ship had fired a single shot. Kethvorin ordered a retreat, his pride shattered, his confidence destroyed. The surviving ships turned and fled toward the safety of fold space, desperate to escape the invisible death that had claimed so many of their brothers. Some of them made it. Most did not. When the survivors finally emerged in Council space, only 400,000 ships remained of the greatest military force in galactic history. Kethvorin sent his report to the Council with shaking hands, describing weapons that should not exist, technologies that violated every law of physics he had ever learned. But his report was already outdated because humanity had not simply defended their territory. They had counterattacked. The Council learned of the Prometheus network when the first drones appeared in orbit around their homeworlds, billions of them. Small automated vessels that emerged from fold space without warning, surrounding planets in swarms so thick they blocked out the light of the stars. They did not fire. They did not attack. They simply waited, and then Admiral James Chun broadcast his message to every inhabited world in Council space. He appeared on every screen and every display. A human male with gray hair and cold eyes, wearing the uniform of Earth's military forces, members of the Galactic Council, he began, his voice calm and measured. You declared war on humanity. You voted to exterminate our species down to the last child. You gave us 30 days to surrender or die. He paused, and his expression did not change. We spent those 30 days building, not weapons to defend ourselves, but weapons to destroy you, every one of you, completely and utterly. The council chamber erupted in chaos as representatives screamed and shouted, demanding action. Demanding response. Admiral Chun continued speaking as if he could hear none of it. The drones you see orbiting your worlds are carrying payloads that will reduce your civilizations to dust. Your cities will crumble. Your technology will fail. Everything you have built over millions of years will be erased in a matter of hours. He leaned forward slightly. You threatened our children, our families, our entire species. And now you will learn what humanity does to those who threaten our extinction. High Arbiter Zethkorin rose from his throne and shouted at the screen. You are bluffing, he declared. Primitives cannot possess such weapons. This is a deception, a trick. Admiral Chun smiled. And it was the coldest smile anyone in the council had ever seen. You have 48 hours to surrender unconditionally, he said. Every species that voted for our extermination will disarm completely and submit to human oversight. If you refuse, we will demonstrate that we are not bluffing." He paused again. "We will begin with the Varth Kai colony world of Kethmora. Population 8 billion in exactly 48 hours. That world will serve as an example of what awaits every species that defies humanity." The transmission ended. Zethkoran immediately ordered all available forces to Kethmora. Determined to protect the colony and prove that humanity's threats were empty, ships raced toward the world. Millions of soldiers prepared to defend it against any attack. But when they arrived, they found the human drones waiting in perfect formation. Billions of them surrounding the planet. Like a shell of metal and death, the Council forces attacked with everything they had. They destroyed perhaps 10,000 drones out of billions. And then the 48 hours ended. The drones did not fire weapons in any traditional sense. Instead, they released something into the atmosphere of Kethmora. Clouds of gray particles that spread across the sky like morning mist within 6 hours. Every building on the planet began to crumble. Every vehicle stopped functioning. Every piece of technology more advanced than a simple tool dissolved into gray powder. The nanomachines consumed only synthetic materials, leaving organic life untouched. 8 billion Varth Kai found themselves standing in the ruins of their civilization, stripped of everything their species had built, returned to a primitive state in less than a day. They were alive, but they had nothing, and across the galaxy, every species that had voted for humanity's destruction watched in horror. This was not conquest. This was not warfare. This was judgment, and humanity had only just begun to deliver it. Admiral Chun appeared on screens once more. "That was mercy," he said simply. "The next world will not be so fortunate. You have 24 hours to begin negotiations. Choose wisely." The transmission ended, and the galaxy began to fall apart. The Galactic Council had stood united for 6 million years. An alliance of civilizations that had weathered countless storms and emerged stronger each time. It took humanity less than 72 hours to tear it apart. The collapse began with the Kitharan observersal. Lithos had been right about everything, and her people knew it. They had seen the patterns and understood that resistance against humanity was not just futile, but suicidal. The Kitharan leadership broadcast their surrender on every frequency, offering complete cooperation in exchange for protection from the coming storm. They provided humanity with everything they had: intelligence reports, fleet positions, council secrets that had been kept for millions of years. Nothing was held back in return. The human drones around their worlds powered down their weapons and simply watched how their species saw this and understood one by one. They began to break away from the Council, each civilization scrambling to negotiate its own terms with the humans before it was too late. The Silurian Compact was next, their collective consciousness reaching out to human diplomats with offers of technology, sharing, and permanent alliance. Then came the Vethari, the Korath, the Million Federation, dozens of species abandoning the Council in a matter of hours. Each defection made the others more likely. A cascade of failures that grew faster with every passing moment. High Arbiter Zethkoran watched his empire crumble from his throne on Kethvara and felt his rage grow beyond all reason. "Cowards!" he screamed at the empty chamber where once 300 species had gathered. "Traitors and cowards! They will regret this betrayal." Only the Varth Kai remained loyal to him now. And even among his own people, whispers of doubt had begun to spread. The destruction of Kethmora had shocked them to their core. 8 billion of their kind had been reduced to primitives in a single day. Left with nothing but their bodies and the clothes they wore, some Varth Kai leaders argued for surrender, for accepting whatever terms the humans offered before worse punishments fell upon them. Zethkorn had those leaders executed for treason. He gathered what remained of the Varth Kai fleet, 200,000 warships that had survived the disaster at Seoul, The finest vessels his species had ever constructed. We will strike at their heart, he told his admirals, his voice burning with hatred. Earth itself, the human homeworld. If we destroy their leadership, their government, their command structure, the drones will have no direction. The other humans will lose hope and surrender. His admirals exchanged uneasy glances, but none dared to argue. Fleet departed Vareth Kai space and entered Fold space, racing towards Sol System on a mission of vengeance and desperation. Thor stood on the bridge of his flagship and imagined the moment of his triumph. Human cities burning beneath his weapons, their civilization erased as they had tried to erase his. He would teach them that the Vareth Kai could not be defeated. He would show the entire galaxy that the old powers still held strength. The fleet emerged from Fold space at the edge of Sol System, weapons charged, shields raised. Every ship ready for the battle that would decide the fate of the galaxy. Thoran looked at the tactical display and frowned. Something was wrong. Where is their fleet? He demanded. Where are the human defenses? His tactical officer studied the readings with growing confusion. Minimal forces detected. High Arbiter, the same 50 ships we observed before. Nothing else. Zeth-Kareen felt a chill run down his spine, but he pushed the fear aside. They are arrogant, he decided. They think their invisible weapon will protect them. All ships advance, maximum speed. Destroy everything in our path. The fleet surged forward. 200,000 engines burning bright. Enough firepower to crack a planet bearing down on the blue world. Called Earth. Zeth-Kareen watched the distance close on his display, counting down the moments until he would have his revenge, and then his tactical officer spoke again. And this time his voice was barely a whisper. High Arbiter. Where did the sun go? Zeth-Kareen looked at the view screen and felt his heart stop. The star called Sol, the yellow sun that had warmed humanity's homeworld for billions of years, was gone, not destroyed, not dimmed, simply gone. As if someone had reached out and removed it from the universe. In its place was nothing but empty darkness. That is impossible. Zeth-Kareen breathed. Stars cannot simply disappear. But even as he spoke, his tactical officer was receiving new data, readings that made no sense. Energy signatures that defied all understanding. The star has been moved, the officer reported, his voice shaking, along with the entire planetary system. They used Fold space anchors on a scale we never imagined possible. They relocated their entire solar system to a new location. Zeth-Kareen stared at the empty void where Earth had been just moments before. They had moved their sun, not a planet, not a moon. Their sun, an entire star system relocated across light years of space in an instant. Now his fleet was alone in empty darkness, far from any support, surrounded by nothing but cold vacuum. Retreat, he ordered, his voice hollow with defeat. All ships retreat immediately. But it was already too late. The Thanatos array activated behind them. Where they could not see it coming, ships began to vanish, pulled into Fold space rifts that opened without warning inside their hull. Zeth-Kareen watched his fleet die around him, vessel after vessel blinking out of existence. Thousands of his people crushed into atoms with each passing second. His flagship was among the last to fall. The High Arbiter of the Galactic Council stood on his bridge as reality tore itself apart around him, the hull screaming as Fold space tried to pull it in multiple directions at once. His final words were a question he had never thought to ask until it was far too late. What are they? He whispered to no one. Then the rift claimed him and he was gone. The news of Zeth-Kareen's death spread across the galaxy within hours. The last resistance to humanity's demands crumbled like sand before a wave species that had clung to hope of council. Victory now rushed to surrender. Desperate to avoid the fate of the Vareth Kai War had lasted 11 days. In that time, humanity had destroyed nearly 1 million enemy warships without losing a single vessel of their own. They had demonstrated weapons that could erase civilizations. In hours, they had moved a star, and now they stood as the dominant power in a galaxy that had laughed at them just weeks before. Admiral Chun received reports of surrender from across Council space, one civilization after another, accepting whatever terms humanity chose to offer. He sat in his office on the relocated Earth and looked at the flood of messages without expressing his aid. Lieutenant Wang stood nearby and waited for orders. "Sir," she finally said. "What happens now?" Admiral Chun was quiet for a long moment. "Now we show them who we really are," he said at last. "Now we show them that we do not like them." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at a sky filled with unfamiliar stars. "Contact Ambassador Vasquez," he ordered. "Tell her to return to Kethvara. It is time to negotiate the peace." He paused and tell her to be kind. "We have proven our strength. Now we must prove our wisdom." Lieutenant Wang saluted and hurried to carry out his orders. Admiral Chun remained at the window, alone with his thoughts. The hard part was over. Now came the harder part, building something better than what they had destroyed. Ambassador Elena Vasquez returned to Kethvara 1 month after the war ended, walking the same crystal corridors she had walked before, passing the same guards who now bowed their heads in respect rather than looking at her with contempt. The great chamber of the council was nearly empty now. Only a handful of representatives remained, species that had surrendered quickly enough to retain some measure of autonomy. Observers sent to witness whatever humanity planned to do. Next, Selrath of the Kithran observers was among them, her large eyes watching Elena with a mixture of fear and something that might have been hope. Elena walked to the center of the chamber and stood where she had stood before, in the same spot where her innocent mistake had nearly cost humanity its existence. She thought about how much had changed since that day, how much she had changed. "Representatives of the former Galactic Council," she began, her voice echoing in the vast space. "Humanity has won this war. We possess the power to do whatever we wish to your civilizations, to punish you for the death sentence you passed on our species, to repay cruelty with cruelty." She paused and looked around at the assembled aliens. "We choose not to do this." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the chamber. Elena continued, "We are offering what we call the new compact, an agreement between humanity and all species who wish to live in peace. This is not conquest. This is not subjugation. This is an offer of cooperation." She outlined the terms in clear and simple language. Every species that had voted for human extermination would dismantle their military fleets, keeping only enough ships for defense against external threats. They would share their technology freely, not as tribute, but as partners in a new galactic civilization. They would accept human observers on their homeworlds for the next 1,000 years, not as rulers, but as witnesses, ensuring that no species would ever again vote to exterminate another. In exchange, humanity would provide protection to all member species. They would share their own technology, including the fold space innovations that had won the war, and they would guarantee that no harm would come to any species that honored the compact. "This is not the peace of the defeated," Elena said. "This is an invitation to build something new together, something better than what existed before." She spread her hands. "Accept it or reject it. The choice is yours. But know that the Prometheus drones will remain in orbit around your worlds until you decide, not as a threat, but as a reminder of what happens when civilizations choose extermination over cooperation." The negotiations took weeks. Some species accepted immediately, grateful for terms far more generous than they had expected. Others argued and bargained, trying to preserve what dignity they could. A few refused entirely and were left alone, their world surrounded by silent drones that did nothing but watch in the end. Most of the former council joined the new compact, not out of fear, though fear certainly played a part. but because they came to understand that humanity was offering something unprecedented, a chance to start again. Selrath requested a private meeting with Ambassador Vasquez, and Elena agreed to see her in her quarters aboard the station. The Kitharan observer sat across from the human ambassador and studied her with those large, pattern-seeing eyes. "You could have destroyed us all," Selrath said, her voice soft with wonder. "You had the power, the justification, everything you needed to wipe out every species that threatened you. Why did you not do it?" Elena considered the question carefully before answering. "Because we are not you," she said finally. "When you looked at us, you saw primitives, animals to be exterminated without a second thought, dangerous vermin that needed to be eliminated." She leaned forward. "When we looked at you, even after everything you did, we saw possibilities. We saw civilizations that had achieved wonders, species that had solved problems we had not yet encountered, cultures and arts and sciences that enriched the galaxy." She shook her head. "Destroying all of that would have been a crime against existence itself. And whatever you may think of us, humanity does not commit such crimes lightly." Selrath was quiet for a long moment. "Your Admiral Chen said something similar," she finally replied. "He told our negotiators that humanity fights to protect, not to conquer." I did not understand what he meant until now. Elena nodded. "We did not want this war," she said. "All we wanted was to join the galactic community as friends and equals. When you denied us that, when you threatened our children and our families, we responded the only way we could." Her expression hardened just slightly, but make no mistake. "If anyone ever threatens humanity like that again, we will not show mercy twice. The weapons we used in this war were our second best option. Our restraint was a choice, not a necessity." She met Selrath's eyes without flinching. "Tell your people that. Tell all the peoples of the galaxy. Humanity wants peace. We want cooperation and friendship and mutual growth. But we will never again allow ourselves to be vulnerable to extermination." Selrath bowed her head in understanding. The new compact was signed 3 months after the war ended, a document that would reshape galactic civilization for millennia to come. Humanity did not rule the galaxy. They had no interest in empire or dominion, but they watched, and the other species, once so proud and powerful, learned to live in the shadow of Earth's children. 100 years passed. The galaxy was almost unrecognizable from what it had been before the war. Trade flourished between species that had once been enemies. Technologies were shared freely. Problems that had seemed unsolvable were addressed by combined efforts of dozens of civilizations. Working together, the Varathkai had rebuilt their colony of Kethmara, restored to its former glory through human assistance. The scars of their humiliation slowly healing over generations on that restored world. In a school that taught the history of the galaxy, a young Varathkai student raised her hand during a lesson about the Human Council War. "Teacher," she asked, "why did the humans hate us so much? What did we do to make them want to destroy everything?" The teacher, old enough to remember the war, old enough to have lived through the fall of Kethmara, paused before answering. "That is a common misunderstanding," she said gently. "The humans did not hate us. That is what made them so terrifying." The student looked confused. "I do not understand." The teacher walked to the window and looked out at the sky, where somewhere beyond the stars, human observers still watched and waited. "When we attacked them," she explained, "we felt nothing for them. They were insects to us, vermin to be exterminated. We did not hate them because we did not consider them worthy of hate." She turned back to face her student. "But the humans, when they struck back, they did not feel hatred either. They felt something else entirely, something we had no word for in our language." "What was it?" the student asked. The teacher was quiet for a long moment, remembering the gray clouds that had fallen on Kethmara. The silence of a civilization stripped of everything it had built. The mercy that had seemed more frightening than any weapon. They called it being protective. She finally said, "They fought not because they hated us, but because they loved their own people so fiercely that they would destroy anything that threatened them." She sat down at her desk and looked at her student with ancient eyes. "That is the lesson of the war. Child, the humans are not conquerors. They are not destroyers by nature. They are protectors. And there is nothing in the galaxy more dangerous than a species that has learned to protect what it loves." The student thought about this for a long time, outside the window. The stars shone bright and peaceful somewhere among them. Humanity waited, not as rulers, not as conquerors, but as guardians of a peace they had built from the ashes of a war they never wanted. And the galaxy, finally, was learning to be worthy of that protection. The silence among the stars was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of hope.